to give us a few moments to process what we just saw. This is a little different than maybe a film festival, and that the whole reason we created Stories by the River was so that people could experience story in such a way that it might actually do something in our lives. We wouldn't just see things for mere entertainment, but that it would be meaningful entertainment to us. And so, hopefully there's a lot of meaning in there. So what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity to find maybe 3 or 4 other people, so be in groups of 3 or 4, and thinking about that diagram we projected at the beginning where there was desire, something starts with a desire, but it easily becomes a demand, then moves on to like judgment and then punishing. Like, once I'm so upset, I feel like I want to, make you pay for what you've done. As we think about that diagram, what sorts of things did you see and hear in the movie that would fit into one of those 4 categories? So the 4 categories are listed up on the screen. They're also in your program. And maybe just take 10 minutes maybe to be in these groups and thinking through the movie. Did you hear any lines that fit into desire, demand, judge, or punish? And then feel free to help yourself to food as well. And then we'll come back together. Eventually what you're going to see is a live conflict mediated, which I know you're just dying to see. How many of you felt like you could identify a demand? Any demand lines? We have to go. Is demand? Very good. How about a judge line? Procrastinator. Does that have his PhD? Rageaholic. Good. These are all good ones. You're a freak. Total judge. Your PMS is out of control. Judging the situation. How many feel like they could identify a punishing line? The police. That's right. I am uncomfortable. I will punish you by calling the police. The gun? There's some punishment in that. I'd say so. Good. Let me ask you this. Could anyone identify a clear desire? Something that started the whole thing. The time they wanted to leave is a possible clear desire. Wanting a cigarette is a possible clear desire. There's a few little possible trigger points, right? But it almost feels like a lot of the movie is not dealing with whatever the initial thing is, right? A lot of the conflict it's all still below the surface. We're just dealing with little punches and jabs maybe. So, kind of interesting as we think about conflict. How much of our conflicts are about our conflict, and how much of our conflicts end up with a bunch of stuff on the surface that has nothing to do with our truth, maybe. So what I'd like us to do now is to get back into our groups for a few moments and ask this question. Was Kate helpful? So for those of you who are related to Randy, it's not personal, it's just reality. So feel free to discuss. Was Kate helpful? Go. So I'm curious to hear, how many of you felt Kate was helpful? A good number. Yay. How many of you thought Kate was unhelpful? Just 1, 2, 1, a half, 1.5. How many of you think maybe a little helpful and a little unhelpful? Wait, that was an option, right? That would, yeah. Other people being involved can be helpful sometimes, right? When it's done well, I think that could be a very meaningful thing. Now, of course, Kate did not sign up to play the role of mediator in any way. She was just doing her best to make sure, sort of in her own way, that everyone was safe, maybe even herself included, right? So she's doing her best, but she had not signed up for this role initially. So we thought, Dominic, myself, this other guy, Christopher here, it might be fun to demonstrate a mediation session. So we hope that this will go well. It's totally live. Christopher knows that we're going to do something regarding kind of like an inner work conflict. So Dominic and I unusually live together, work together sometimes, and that has its complications as well as its upsides. So for a lot of people, they can feel like mediation is too scary, so a lot of people won't even enter into something like that. They're often embarrassed. They think people will think poorly of them if they start to like air things that are true in their lives. And so a lot of stuff tends to just stay in a place of tension in our lives instead of kind of getting to the sense of peace. So Kate talks about this moment. She says, either way, no matter what happens, there's no peace. And for a lot of people, we don't experience this peace that Kate is screaming for, kind of. There's no peace. Nobody wins. Everybody feels alone, right? So Dominic and I, we're going to air our conflicts here for all of you and the writer. Yes. And so Christopher is going to mediate this thing that we're going to talk to you about in front of you all so that you all have something that you can talk about that feels a little less personal than yourselves, right? And so hopefully when we get to the end of this, we'll all find that this was a great thing and we're all thankful to have been here for it. So let's get started.
So what I'll do is just ask you for the story and maybe give a little context. In addition to being a writer, I'm also studying to be a counselor. And so I sit with people a lot. I'm certainly not a trained mediator, and there are people who do such. But to sit with anybody that you care about and listen to a story, you recognize that there are at least two sides to a story. So you guys can kind of lay out the story, and I'll ask some questions, and we'll see what we do.
All right.
We'll see if I do better than Kate. I don't have her glasses, so. But.
That's right. Do you want to go first?
No.
Okay. So I'll go first. So Dominic and I, we work together, and for a long time we've played on worship teams together. But since we started this church, we kind of co-lead a worship team. To my mind, what that means is that Dominic is the band leader and that I make the spiritual decisions and the vocal decisions. And to my mind, what that also means is if there's a conflict that arises about how it should go, I'm going to call it because in the end I want to feel the most comfortable. So I feel like, I've got to sing it and I've got to lead it spiritually, so I want it to feel comfortable for me. I think Dominic disagrees with that. Sometimes it feels like he wants more charge over that.
Yes.
And my feeling is Dominic maybe can't sing well enough all the time to be the leader, and that it's often very difficult to play guitar since that's not his first instrument, and sing at the same time and kind of lead the whole thing. So it often feels to me like it would be easier for him to not have to take that on, or maybe even like that's not even possible to take on sometimes. So sometimes what that means is that when we're doing a rehearsal, we actually act out in the midst of it, that there's a little like tug of war about who's going to win.
We always do that, using the word always.
And and that can be very uncomfortable for our band because the band has to wait.
Is there anybody here who's in that band? No.
Michael.
Oh, yes. Oh, so we have a live witness. Okay. We might have to bring you in.
Yes. Yes. So, point of fact, one person even recently who just joined said, "So, do you guys sometimes have a difficult time doing music together?" Yep. Mm-hmm. So, yes, we try to get better at it, but it tends to be something that always comes up. Recently, we tried to declare an amnesty day where each of us would forgive each other for anything that we've done that we don't like. And for Dominic, it was this issue. And rather than get to amnesty, we just got to, we can't resolve it. So that's my side of the story. Would you like to go?
Dominic?
I just want to point, Counselor, she just took your job. Christina has a natural, her and I both share the same, I think, temperament. And in the way that we have well, I should say, I feel we have the same temperaments in how we want to do things, that we want to see life go a certain way. We want the house to be a certain way. We want the dishes to do something. You know, she has those, so some of those things. I have other things I nitpick. And especially in music. So music's our passion. That's the thing we do. We grew up doing a lot. And I think I'm more of a, she's Kelly Clarkson. I am more Coldplay. You know, like, I guess there will tend to be a clash with your musical tastes and things like that. But we have similar overlapping genres and things that we like to do. But when we're in the moment, I think the deal is I think, oh, that's like a Celine Dion piece there, and I'm not thinking Celine Dion. I'm thinking like Rage Against the Machine. Or I'm thinking something quite different, right? And I'm like, that is horrible. That is my idea of music, and you're messing with it, right? Also, there's another thing at play, a dynamic of like, wait, you can't call that. You can't just say that that's the end of the creative process. We're in the midst of a creative process right now. This means it's a process, and I'm right, right? You know. So like, and generally, if in previous experience for me is like, well, I'm gonna push my way until I get my way, right? Because that's Christopher has witnessed this personally, because I and him have had, me and the counselor have had that kind of a emotional tug of war.
Yes, there's a little backstory there. That earlier today, what I said is all of this, the whole making this movie was all a ruse, so that I would come here and say, Christina is right, Dominic, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Everything is all just like, it's a premise.
Yeah.
It's not true.
That's
but-
how this all began.
Right. So that tends to be my thing. I say, that sucks. Do this, right? And in the midst of that, we're trying to keep order and do all these things, but I'm like, no, I have an idea. You asked me to be the band leader. You want me to lead this thing? I hear that, right? Then I will do that, right? So and then she's like, no, we can't do that. We don't have time right now. Blah. And then kind of cuts to the chase, right, as it were. So I'm like, hey, right? This is my parade, not yours, you know? So I feel like that often happens, and then tends to be like, it feels like you're cutting the creative process in a time then we have a time period. So I'm not a time person. So for me, time, what are you talking about? Time, like we got a half more hour to work on this thing till it's awesome, And Christina's like, well, we've got an hour, and the baby is gonna, we need to go to sleep, right? There's some real practical things that have to happen in those moments. So, and then the band has to, we have to stay on track. So, for me, it's always the conflict of. I'm always thinking like, man, this doesn't sound. I want this to do this, and it's not doing what I want it to do. And she's like, no, it's good. That's the way I want to do it. And she's like, that's not very good. And I'm going, that's not very good. Oh yeah, that's not very. You're not very good, right? So it kind of winds up that way in some moments, not all moments, but some moments. So.
Okay, so let me just make a couple of observations as if I don't know you. There's the presenting conflict, right? And it gets pressurized by two things in this instance. One is time limitations, and the second is they're in public when they're having this disagreement, and they're a married couple in public having a disagreement. And so those things kind of pressurize it. But you see the things that Dominic was just talking about is a greater level conflict of time deficit disorder, which I'll make a therapeutic alliance with you and say I share that. Right? So, and then somebody who's like keeping order, knows what needs to happen, keeps us on schedule. So there's a basic core conflict there that ain't going away, right? But somehow, with the pressure of the time and the pressure of the public role, it's kind of, adding a little bit of extra fuel somehow. And it seems like what you end up doing is I'm doing a little Dr. Phil, I guess. Is it possible that you need to pre-decide how to handle this before you get into the public situation where you subject Michael and the other poor unsuspecting people who just, joined your worship team because they thought it was about God or something. And they're like, what have we gotten into here? So the notion that you're going into, how long's your rehearsal?
It's only an hour.
We have very few rehearsals. And
Few
then
rehearsals and an hour long. So
Yeah.
that's even more pressure. So within the context of that is to kind of go in with your game plan and to have the conversation in advance, kind of, because you know where you're going to go. This sounds like a very familiar conflict, and I have a guess that this conflict is probably visited in other domains. Yes?
Yeah.
So it's,
Yes.
so it's, could we call it a pervasive,
Yeah.
pervasive conflict?
Yes, who will make a decision
Yeah.
when a decision needs to be made?
And it seems like even the notion that you're able to talk about it in front of a group of people shows that you have the capacity to back off of your own story and recognize that there's another story. But maybe what would be helpful is to have something like this that's longer form, where you actually decide this is what would be helpful to me in that moment. Because my guess is, I'm going to ask you each a question, what's the thing about that conflict that's the hardest for him?
Mhm.
Like, what would you say?
Is the hardest for Dominic?
Yes, when it happens, when you're kind of at loggerheads,
Yes.
what's the hardest part of it for him?
Yes. So I think what I've started to realize is sometimes I ask something of Dominic that he cannot do. And rather than be able to say, I can't do it, he'll say, your idea is stupid. And then I'll realize some point later on, it wasn't so much that the idea was stupid as it was that he didn't want to feel outed that he couldn't do something. Only thing is I didn't know he couldn't do it until it was like down the bunny trail.
Yeah.
So I think Dominic often feels dumb or embarrassed in that moment.
And when that happens, where you come to loggerheads, what is the hardest part of it for Christina?
Well, that's a circular argument. The one that I was with this particularly is the one that comes up all the time is being I don't know, maybe it's just I need you to do something and it's maybe patience. Maybe the word is the best way to sum it up. I think maybe that's it. Just patience. That's basically.
Let me ask it another way, because the way she answered it was kind of pointing out that she's put you in an awkward situation. When you put her in that awkward situation, what's it cost her? Like, why is that hard for her?
Oh, well, yeah, put it that way. Then
Yeah.
it's
I'm going after empathy here.
Yeah,
Brian.
right. I know.
Sorry.
I know. It's well.
Doesn't come naturally, I know.
No, empathy. It's just not. For me, it's or I should say for Christina, it's probably when I am frustrated, or like she was saying, and I have to do something. Often I'm asked to do lots of things, and I feel like, oh yeah, you know what? Instead of just saying, oh, you know, that stunk. Let's move on, kind of thing. Like, no, I'm going to stay there for her, for me to
So
stay
your
there.
stubbornness
Yeah.
is what kind of pushes her?
Yeah, it is. And stubbornness and...
Perceived stubborn.
Yeah,
I'm not
perceived
saying you are
stubbornness, right.
stubborn. I'm just saying she might.
Yeah, I'm trying to
feel
think.
that way.
I'm trying to think like through all the detail. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it just depends on what it is, right? So if it's music or anything else, it's kind of the nitpicking of anything we do, whether it be the music or dishes. I guess the example of the movie. That's a good example for us. It's dishes and things like that. It translates like, "Whoa, I'm too busy right now," and I think that kind of stubbornness in saying, having an excuse for what it is will drive her kind of and say like, oh, you've amped me up now, buddy, that kind of thing. So I feel like that's some of those things that will do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that might be your assignment. If there's an assignment, before your next rehearsal, You say, we are going to have this conflict because it exists. It exists in our personality and our persona. How do we want to pre-decide? And what can you give me a clue as to that this is getting difficult for you before it comes to loggerheads? Like, can you, before we go down this, to use the slippery slope thing, before we go down, can you tell me we're at the top of the slide right now? And so if you push here, we're going to end up in the same place. And if you pre-decide that, what it means is that if in the moment somebody's calling you on something that you would be inclined to resist, you've pre-decided, I'm giving up the right to play that card, to push back. I'm going to accept that you're noticing something that I haven't noticed. Like, oh, is that dynamic beginning to happen? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if, try that, and I wonder if what you will discover is that there's something else that might happen. Now, again, that doesn't take away the inherent conflict because it's there, but there's something else that might happen that would give you a reward for not bickering.
Like the word peanut butter? Is that what you're saying? We get to the top and we say peanut butter, peanut butter. And then, is that what you're saying or no?
If you need a little M&M, if you need some behavioral modification, and she gives you an M&M when you behave well.
That's my language. Right
Yeah,
there. Yes.
I was going a little bit more sophisticated than that, but
but I'm not.
Meaning a mutual reward. So say you came out of a rehearsal and you realized, you know what? I hated the way you do that song, but I did not get in your face about it. That was really good. And it's like, yeah, you know what? That really, that I could feel that you were really upset, and I just decided to let it go. Like if the two of you had an experience where you negotiated that together, but I think it needs you need to pre-decide. And you're grown-ups. Allegedly. And Michael can hold you accountable.
He's filming for
Michael
a reason.
can show up at the rehearsal and say, hey guys, did you have that conversation? And if you say no, he's like, we're not rehearsing then, because I don't want to deal with it. It's like if you really need your band to help you. And that would be another thing to do, is to, in the moment, have a little therapy session with your band and say, okay guys, one I think a good question to ask your bandmates would be like, how's this feeling to you guys that we're doing this? And it could be that might be another motivation to kind of get on top of it. Because when you realize, actually, I didn't enjoy this. I was enjoying this rehearsal, but I didn't enjoy it at that point. Then there's a way in which this kind of organism of that group of people might support you in not going down the
slippery slope.
Yes.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Haha. Okay, so what you're going to do, can you put up the next slide for me? You are going to get into groups and ask yourselves this question maybe. Who do you relate with? So you could relate with Dominic, Christopher, or myself. What happened that you thought was helpful or unhelpful? And then was there anything about the experience that you would find helpful in your own life? So you might have to do a little connecting in order to find something that relates to you. But ultimately, that's what we're here for. So get back into those groups and feel free to discuss amongst yourselves. So if you're interested in pursuing more of this in any way, you'll probably have noticed there's a number of resources. There's that slippery slope diagram. At the bottom, there's this peacemaker.net website. It's a wealth of resource about how to handle conflict. And then last week, we actually talked about forgiveness a little bit, and forgiveness is kind of part of the story with conflict. So there's some resources in there about forgiveness as well. And so what I would encourage you to do is even take more time yet today after you leave here to consider how do we resolve conflict? What might that look like in your life? And how might resolving conflict bring a little more peace to your life? Because here we've dropped into a very serious subject using comedy, right? The movie's a comedy, and we're making light of our own lives a little bit. But for a lot of us, it can all but take over our lives a little bit. And so our hope is that having experienced a film like this actually makes our lives better, that we don't just kind of move on and life stays the same as usual. But for now, feel free to stick around. You'll see that Christopher and Rochelle, are you still here? She was second AC, and Michael are here. So if you want to talk to people, Jillian, about the process and how the movies are made, feel free to do that. We also have our previous 3 movies for sale. They're $3, which is a total steal. It's got like all the teaching materials that are behind the scenes from the director, and the movie itself. So if you're interested in that, that is also available. But beyond that, feel free to enjoy the food and have a great day.